Welcome to the Obsessed podcast. My name is Dhruv and I'm going to be your host for the day. I started this podcast because I have been obsessed with business, finance, and entrepreneurship for my entire life. And I decided that it would be interesting to share this journey with a lot more people. So every week, I research companies, frameworks, strategies, and tools, and I share those learnings with you. I hope you enjoy the podcast and let me know if you have any feedback. Brands are these phenomenal things invented by mankind. I would argue that they're one of the best inventions of modern day civilization. Brands deliver a consistency in experience that is unparalleled. Every time you and I go across the world, we can open a can of Coke and we will have the same experience whatsoever. The same fizzling experience will be delivered again and again, and we all crave that. In fact, we all consume multiple brands each day in different shapes and forms. We buy these brands because we know that these brands will deliver a consistent experience and we trust them. These brands are just pools of trust that you can buy and sell, and they command a huge premium for them. Warren Buffett says that brands are one of the best moats that a company can ever build, and I agree with him. In fact, the richest person in the world today, Bernard Arnold, owns a consortium of global iconic brands. Because when you buy a commodity and sell as a brand, there is a huge value accrual. It is the value accrual of trust, and trust is one of the most important currencies that we as humans trade in. But I have always been curious on where do brands come from, who starts these brands, and how do you build a brand? As a founder, I think you feel the same. But neither does Warren Buffett, neither does Bernard Arnold really talk about building brands because both of them are either investors or acquirers of brand. So I set out to study iconic brands and see what can I learn from them. And today I share those learnings with you. So the story that we will discuss today is the story of Red Bull. Red Bull is a global iconic brand. I'm sure you've had a Red Bull at some point in your time. And you know that the drink tastes a little weird. It tastes a little medicinal, but it still sells over 10 billion cans each year. That's more than one can for each person on this earth. The scale at which they operate is absolutely phenomenal. I can't imagine selling 10 billion cans a year and building this iconic company in less than 40 years. But that's what the founders of Red Bull have accomplished. So let's study on how they did it and what unique tactics were they able to implement to build these brands. What's also unique to the story of Red Bull is that this brand is not owned by a consortium of oversized companies like Unilever or Procter & Gamble. It's a story of a brand that started from the bottom up. They did not use traditional media. In fact, one could argue it's a very anti-brand or consume every day. So let's see how did this come along and what can we learn from them. Before I share the story of Red Bull with you, I have a small question. Where do you think Red Bull is from? Do you think it's an American company? Is it a European company? Or is it an Asian company? I know some of you might be thinking that it's either an European or an American company. And to be honest, I thought the same. But I was surprised to learn that it's actually a Thai company. So let's go back to the 1920s in rural Thailand, where this all began with the birth of Chaleo Yudvidya. Chaleo was an exceptional student, born to poor Chinese immigrants, but his ambitions could not be contained, and he always sought a better future. His family was into duck farming, and he started helping them out at a very young age, because of which he was not able to complete his education. But this did not lead him to stop his journey of entrepreneurship. He decided that it was time at a very young age. We're not really sure of his age, but at a very young age, he set out to move to Bangkok for a better future and explore the opportunities that the city had to offer him. He tried his hand at multiple things. He dabbled in fruit trading. He recognized that the price of durian was much cheaper in his rural city than in Bangkok. So he decided that it was a good idea to buy fruit from his city and sell it in Bangkok. However, he did not account that the fruit was extremely perishable and it would get spoiled by the time he reached Bangkok. So his first venture was a failure. Recognizing that he did not have a lot of knowledge about business, he decided to learn at his brother's pharmacy. He helped him out as a chemist, and he was a very aggressive learner. His knowledge about pharmaceuticals and medicines would come out very handy to him later, but he did not know that yet. As his knowledge about medicines grew, he decided that it was a better idea to become a distributor and salesman for medicines rather than a pharmacist. So he set out to work for one of the bigger pharmaceutical agencies in Thailand for distributing their medicines and becoming a pharmaceutical salesman. He worked at this job for a couple of years, and he had built his own network, knowledge, and distribution to understand how to scale this company further. This is a very common trend that I've seen in Eastern businessmen, where they would start at the lowest end of the value chain by distribution and marketing, which almost takes no investment. So it's almost a skill-based job and highly, highly competitive, but they're able to carve out a niche for themselves. And then they go out in a highly capital-intensive way to vertically integrate their whole stack of the business, essentially, where you start out with sales and distribution, then you move on to manufacturing and integrate both of them together. So Charlie does something very similar. He sets up his own pharmaceutical company known as TC Pharmaceuticals. Initially, the company is just an importer for medicines in Thailand. Charlie recognizes that there is a demand for imported medicines in Thailand because there were not enough medicines being developed. So he would import and distribute these medicines throughout his network. He had amassed licenses for multiple companies at this point in time, but he also recognized that there is a lot of money to be made in manufacturing these medicines. Now, as I mentioned earlier, his knowledge about pharmacy and chemistry would come in very handy at this time. He was somewhat of an inventor of medicines, so he would sit out late at night and develop medicines for pain relief, fever, antibiotics, for pus. At this point in time, he also started a brand called wiings that became extremely popular in Thailand. So we see that he's very ambitious. He has a very succinct understanding of business from a very young age. He's been dabbling in different kinds of businesses. He has built out his knowledge stack from the very outside to the inside. And now he's at a stage where he's really thriving, right? He's built one of the most popular brands called wiings in Thailand. At the same point in time, he recognizes that his competitors are selling a very unique medicinal product that helps people to stay active. Now, it is important to recognize that at this stage in Thailand, there's a lot of low-income blue-collar workers in Thailand who had to work long hours, and they would consume this medicinal drink that gave them energy. So this is the first iteration of an energy drink. So he used his medical knowledge and basically reverse engineered this drink, or created his own version of the drink with taurine and other medicinal drugs, and he called this drink Kratin Deng. But it was not only his knowledge about creating these drinks that was unique, it was also his sales and distribution. He was a highly competitive and competent salesman, as we've seen, right? He spent his initial years learning how to do sales and marketing, and then he started building his brands and manufacturing so that he could use his knowledge and make a higher profit, I'm assuming. So at this point in time, he has this product called Kratin Deng, which is extremely popular in the city of Bangkok and other major cities. But the brand has not really has been able to expand into the rural sites. And the drink itself is not very popular there. Recognizing an advantage there, he decided that he will focus his brand, Kratin Deng, to the rural areas of Thailand. He will not focus as much on the big cities, which were highly competitive. He set out to target the rural areas. Now, marketing in these rural areas was much easier because people had a lot of word of mouth marketing. Even if you put out a couple of posters, it would have enough sales because the product was so unique. It really solved a problem that no other company was solving at that point in time. So within a few years, Kratin Deng became the second highest grossing product in the energy drinks category in Thailand. So it was a very successful product. Charlie was already doing well, but Charlie's ambition, as mentioned earlier, could not be contained. He set out his eyes on a global empire. He started expanding in Singapore, in other Asian countries as well, but he had moderate success at this. Now, by no means is the success of Charlie at this point not phenomenal. He owns one of the largest energy drinks companies in the world. His pharmaceutical company is thriving. He owns another brand called Vicimycin. He makes pain relief medicines, fever relief medicines. He is a licensee for multiple uh, international brands in Thailand. So he's set up his empire very good. He's already doing well, but it is nowhere compared to the success that Red Bull would achieve, and that's why I call it a moderate success. So in 1984, he is interacting with one of the marketing executives for his licensed brand called Blendax. Dietrich Mateschitz is a representative of this company, and he would further on become the second co-founder of Red Bull. So before we take a step further into this journey, I wanted to take a step back into the journey of Dietrich Mateschitz in 1994, where he was born in a small village in Austria, in Styria. In this city, he spent his younger years with his mother because his father was a prisoner of war after World War II, and he would only meet his father at the age of 11. So there is certainly an absence of a father figure at a younger age. Even at a later age, we see that his father was not as involved. But even at a very young age, Dietrich Mateschitz, whom we will call DD for the ease of pronunciation, was a natural salesman. One of the stories that I've come across while researching him was that to convince his mother that he wanted to go to the capital city of Vienna to study, he found a unique course in the University of Vienna for ship construction. And he convinced his mother that he was passionate about shipbuilding and that was his dream. That was the only condition under which his mother would let him go to Vienna and not at the local university at Graz. So we see that he's a very sharp and ambitious businessman who also recognizes that a big city would be able to give him a lot more opportunity, something that we saw in Charlio as well. He was a perseverant young man, but he was never really good at academics. He took 10 years to graduate from university, and that's absolutely crazy if you think about it. He was 28 by the time he graduated from university. And when someone asked him that why did he take so much time, he just said life at college is good. And talking to some other people, it was very evident that he spent a lot of his time partying, pursuing women, and just having a good time in college, as he mentions. So by the time he graduates from college, it is already a little late than most other people, but he decides that it is now time to put his head down and focus and build a career. He started his career as a marketing salesman at Unilever, and then he quickly rose the ranks and joined Blendax. By this time, he was already successful as a marketing executive. He had risen the ranks very quickly. He was ambitious, he was looking for opportunities, and he was very good at execution. But he was not happy. His ambition was to do something larger and bigger than this. Also, he was suffering with work-life monotony. He believed that marketing executives only saw hotel rooms, conference rooms, and planes. They sought refuge in alcohol and women. There was nothing very engaging and interesting in his life at this point, despite achieving success in terms of his career. So he was constantly looking out for other opportunities. And on a certain trip to Thailand, he was very jet lagged and he was chatting up with a taxi driver when the taxi driver recommended Kraten Dang as this energy drink which would help him cure his hangover. He drank Kraten Dang and he was mesmerized. He could not believe that this drink was not available in the West. He was super excited, and by coincidence, he started researching the company, but he was still settled on it. He didn't do much, and he kept researching it, and he kept drinking it every time he went to Thailand, but nothing much was materializing out of this. Until one day, when he was looking for opportunities, and he found out that one of the highest taxpayers of Japan at the time was the owner of an energy drink company. Recognizing this opportunity for this huge market and the lack thereof in the West, he decided to hit up the licensee for Blendax in Thailand, which happened to be Charlio Youth Vidya, who owned Kraten Deng. So he got in touch with Charlio and he recommended that why not they both of them start a energy drinks company in the West where Charlio would manufacture the product and DD would sell it in the West. At this proposal, Charlier was ecstatic. And one important side note to the story is that to do this research from the time he first had Kraten Dang to approaching Charlier Yodvidya, Didi took almost 2 years. This shows that this was not an impromptu decision made by him. He took his time to research, to think, and to recognize that this was an amazing product indeed. And then he decided to propose this idea to Charlier. So the partnership was struck up. It was a very unique partnership with very important covenants that I will discuss, because these are very important to the long-lasting partnership that continued in the future as well. One of the basic terms was that Charlier would do production and Didi would do marketing and distribution. It was a sort of a gentleman's agreement where both of them would put up $500,000 each. Each of them would get 49%, and Charlier's son would get 2%. This meant that the control of the enterprise would be with the youth with their family, but it would also mean that there would be no interference from the family to whatever Didi would do. This was very important to Didi because he wanted to do business in his own way, and he was putting up the same amount of money. Kraten Dang was already popular in Thailand and expanding in Singapore and other Asian countries as mentioned. So the IP was licensed in a very complex way. And till date, we don't really know how the IP is licensed because it is a private company. But we do know that the IP is licensed in a complex way where the youth with their family owns part of the IP and they've licensed it out to Redbull Austria. And it's a little complex, basically. Nonetheless, the terms proved the prowess of Charlier Yodvidya's part because he recognized from his own experience that the person who does sales and marketing actually owns the company. So it was very important to license the IP in a very smart way so that in the future, Didi would not go off and spin his own brand. Now, recognizing this business acumen was very important on Charlier's part, just because if you have studied the story of McDonald's, we see Ray Kroc screwing over the McDonald's brother over parts like these, where they were not the most sharp with these covenants, and this led to Ray Kroc screwing them over in some way, shape, or form. So the contract is set out in a gentleman's form, and the story of Red Bull begins. Now, once Didi is back in Austria, he quits his job in 1984 and sets out to work on this new venture. There have been lots of struggles. It's not a go green story at all. He has to decide on a new name because Kraten Dang is a very complex name and no one can pronounce it properly in the West. So he recognizes this and he translates Kraten Dang, which stands for Red Gore, to Red Bull, which is Gore is basically a type of aggressive animal similar to a bull in the East, and he literally translates it to Red Bull. He decides to use the similar IP that Kraten Dang has, which is two bulls horn to horn with each other with the red and yellow logo that is pretty infamous now. But to decide on how the can should look and how it should be done, he talks to a friend who runs a marketing agency, and that's how he builds the iconic blue and silver can that we use till date. And he sets out for a slimmer can than Coke. Coke comes out in its traditional can that we use today, but he decides that a Coke can would not be ideal, and he wanted to stand out in the market because he understood that differentiation is key. And we've seen this replicated by multiple entrepreneurs across stages, including Jeff Bezos, where he says differentiation is key for the survival of any business. So he does a taste sampling, but the taste sampling fails miserably. And one of the huge marketing executives in the industry had to say this about Red Bull before it started and even after it started. There is no evidence whatsoever, and there is no logic to suggest that there is a massive gap in the market for a drink that tastes worse than Coke, costs more than Coke, and comes in a smaller can. And indeed, if you had done the market research on Red Bull, everybody would have told you to get lost. And indeed, when they did test the market, people did tell them to get lost. This shows the conviction, perseverance, and execution of the brand. The taste palette needed to be adjusted from Kraten Dang's, but the taste palette still failed in the West. He decided to get the drink carbonated because In Thailand, the drink was just sold in a juice type of format, but in the West, he recognized that sodas were much more popular, so the drink needed to be carbonated. Plus, carbonation also allowed the drink to be served in more hipster and young places like clubs and bars. But what is really inspiring about the story is that Didi had complete conviction in his product. Someone later asked him that what is behind the success of Red Bull, right? Is it the brand? Is it what made you believe in Red Bull so much? And he says that the product was just phenomenal and there was no reason that this product should have ever failed. So this shows the unrelenting conviction that Didi possessed in this brand and his company and his product, which led to the success in the future through impressive marketing that we will discuss. So this is not the last of the things that Red Bull struggled with. It struggled with taste. It's struggled with its nutritional contents, where the government of Austria, and in fact governments across the world, would not give Red Bull approval just because they did not know what's there in the can. He had to constantly indulge in health tests that the company would pay for to get the product approved across jurisdictions. And there were multiple challenges faced by government regulators who would not give it approval because they would believe there is bull semen in the product, or there are different kinds of ingredients that would not be feasible, or it contained other stuff that was not favorable. So now you have this strange looking can, a thin can that has a weird taste and is almost ready to launch in 1987. At this point, they have spent a decent amount of money to build this product out. He is ready with a carbonated drink, but now comes in the genius of Didi. He is not fettered by these challenges or these failures. He's ready to conquer. 2 years later, in 1989, the company is running in losses. They have not made a single euro in profit. He has been repeatedly been told by friends and family and everyone he approaches that the brand will not succeed, but he continues. And in fact, in 1990, they turn a profit for the first time. This shows the undying focus of Didi Mateschitz, because any entrepreneur would have given up by this point. For 2 years, for almost 5 years at this point, by 1989, he had been working on this company that had launched his product, was not able to succeed, but Didi was undaunted and unfettered. He could not be bothered by what anyone had to say, and this undying focus in his product would lead to the success later. It is his undying focus, but also his marketing genius that leads to the success of Red Bull. He recognizes from a very young age, because he's a natural salesman, as we discussed, that the importance of branding and marketing. The can that we used till date is the same can. It is a thin can with the silver and blue marketing. The brand's tagline, "Gives you wings," was established in 1987 when the can first launched, and till date they're using the same branding. He understands that these things compound and build over time. So he spent a lot of time building his product for almost 3 years, perfecting it to his ideation, and then he launched it, believing that he had the perfect product with him. I do believe that most companies struggle with constantly innovating products because the market evolves, but Didi had found a product that worked somewhat like a SaaS company. He built the product once, but he could sell it again and again. He had to produce massive amounts of the product, but the product did not change. This is what makes a unique company. As we mentioned Warren Buffett in the beginning, Warren Buffett constantly mentions that the product needs to stay stagnant with a moat built through brands and other competitive advantages, rather than constantly innovating on the product again and again. And this is something that Didi recognized. So the brand is indigenous in its own approach, because he recognizes that in Thailand, the brand was sold to low income groups and the price was very competitive with the competitors. However, Didi wanted to price this product in the West as a product for the elite and the rich, or not even elite and the rich, but a product that is highly priced. And that pricing continues till date. At that point in time, the can was priced at almost €2, which was significantly higher than the Coke product alternatives that were available. But Didi knew how to market, and he believed that people would pay for this can if the marketing was done correctly. So let's discuss, how did he do this? He did not sort out for traditional marketing avenues like TV and print or advertorials. He recognized that these platforms were not the best to build a brand. He had worked at Unilever and Blendax, who did top-down things, so he realized that he needed to build a brand that was built bottom-up, so that the brand could grow into its identity. To do this, he assigned ambassadors in college. These ambassadors would be described as alpha Bs. These ambassadors were probably the cool kids in college who had influence over a small couple of hundred people in the college. I would think of them as micro-influencers today. Influencers who have a couple of thousand followers, not too many, but they have immense power over their audience because people truly connect with them and believe in them. So he created these college ambassadors who would go around driving the iconic Red Bull Mini, which had a huge can in the top, as some of you might have seen those. And these college ambassadors would drive them across college campuses and host parties with Red Bull, where Red Bull would sponsor the party by giving away free Red Bull. And once people had consumed the drink, they were hooked on. It was almost like a drug. People called this crack for the poor. And it was interesting because Didi knew that he had been hooked onto the product since a young age, and everyone who would drink it would also be hooked on. So after 6 years, in 1993, when the product had turned profitable, it was a leading product in Austria. He had marketed them in bars and clubs. He also created hype without launching in other countries. People from Germany would come to Austria, hear about this new drink that was available at parties, and go back and tell their friends in Germany that there is this interesting drink available in Austria. To create more hype, he would litter empty cans of Red Bull after parties so that people would be like, what is this drink? Why is it around the cool parties and the cool places in Austria? He engaged in all sorts of unique tactics by placing these cans in ski resorts and bars and clubs and associating the drink with extreme partying and extreme life. And he knew a lot about this life because he had spent 10 years in college. One could argue that he knew college culture better than anyone else, and he leveraged this knowledge and insight while building the brand. Every time someone would criticize the drink, he would take it in his stride. If someone would say that Red Bull has bull semen in it, he would use this rumor and use it as a marketing tactic, very subtly, by placing it on the website, not agreeing to it or denying to it. This led to more mystique around the brand. And the more mystique there was around the brand, the more infamous it became among the young crowd of Europe. So when he wanted to launch in Germany, he faced similar challenges where the regulators would not approve, where the regulators felt that there was actual bull semen in the product. So they had to do market research, and not market research, they had to do health research and nutritional research and show and prove to the regulators that there was in fact no bull semen in them. That's what speaks to the marketing genius that Didi had created, that even regulators were not able to believe how this drink could succeed so well. He had used the element of the forbidden, where people want to consume the forbidden, the young people want to consume the rebellious, to associate with his drink. And when people would associate that with, when people began associating the forbidden with Red Bull, the sales increased automatically. But it was not all beautiful. In 1995, they expanded to the UK, which was one of the most bustling markets out there for energy drinks. Within 2 years, they had only sold 2 million cans, which was very less for Red Bull. And they had accumulated £12 million in losses. So Didi, being the operator he is, he fires the whole executive team, and he uses the same launch book in the UK. And within 2 years, they were selling more than 200 million cans in the UK. He used the same playbook that he had used in Austria, Germany, and across Europe, which was the iconic Mini, using free samples, sponsoring parties, and being present at every cool event that he could be. So in 1999, he's ready to take over the US. 1999 or 1997, I think. He's ready to take over the US. As a fun fact, you know what's the best performing stock over the last 25 years since 1999? It's Monster Energy. It's the best performing stock in the last 24 years. And that's really iconic because Monster is actually a competitor to Red Bull, and Red Bull still owns a larger market share. So one could argue that the best performing stock over the last 25 years has been Red Bull because Red Bull is global and it owns a larger market share than Monster Energy. Nonetheless, by the end of the century, Red Bull was ready for its US takeover. They employed a similar strategy that they had employed in Europe. They had these ambassadors in colleges. They were going out to beaches in LA. They had placed their drinks at bars and clubs. And by the end of the century, people started calling it the poor man's cocaine. Vodka and Red Bull was very popular in the US. Vodka and Jägermeister was very popular. At the same point in time, it was available in the major cities like LA, New York, and Chicago. People in the US loved Red Bull, and Red Bull continued to grow. But that's when, in the later part of the 1990s, Red Bull starts changing its strategy a little bit. Didi recognizes that he cannot solely grow the brand on the backs of these college ambassadors and the Mini. He needs something bigger, something more unique, and something broader. He also has the money coming in now, right? He doesn't need to rely on these unique tactics to grow his brand. He can actually go out and invest money in unique marketing. So he starts dabbling in different kinds of things, which are completely different than traditional media. He starts sponsoring sports events. He's sponsoring teams and music festivals, but nothing of scale that what would come in the 21st century. So they had a unique sports ambassador program where they would not write or call these sportsmen ambassadors, but they would associate themselves with the brand of Red Bull. It is something similar to what Nike does with its sports ambassadors, but different because Red Bull was not paying them. They would pay some of them an endorsing fee, but not all of them. But programs like these made Didi recognize the importance of extreme marketing and the importance of brand building. He recognized that brands are not only built by distribution, but also by associating them with extreme sports. And sports as a medium was not over leveraged at that point in time. He recognized that sports and media was one. He says this much later in his interviews as well, but he recognized that sports was essentially media and no one was capitalizing on it as heavily as it should have. He wanted Red Bull to be a brand for the extreme individuals. To do that, he needed to sponsor extreme sports, extreme events, anywhere where people were doing extreme stuff, Red Bull needed to be present. So he started sponsoring big music festivals. He started sponsoring award shows, calling them the Red Bull Award Show, where they would reward stuntmen in Hollywood, which was very unique, right? And they would do these award shows sponsored by Red Bull. They started sponsoring all kinds of extreme sports, like they own 2 F1 teams, as I mentioned earlier. They own an esports team today. And all of these kinds of ideas started popping up in Didi's mind. Till date, Red Bull spends almost 40% of its revenue on marketing, which is almost $4 billion. And it is much higher than Coke or Pepsi, which spend almost 6 or 7% of their revenue. So Didi recognized that his drink did not have a proprietary uniqueness as Coke or Pepsi do. The products or the ingredients of the drink are openly available. They're written on the can. What Red Bull had unique to separate itself from its competitors was the brand. People tried to compete on price. People who were in the initial team of Red Bull US tried to launch their own product, which was much cheaper, but they failed because the Red Bull brand was what Red Bull was building, and that's what people wanted. People went to a club and they wanted Red Bull and Coke. They did not want Monster, and they wanted Red Bull and vodka. They did not want Red Bull and they did not want Monster and vodka. Sorry, I'm slipping here, but so he goes all in on these extreme sports. He launches his second product 16 years later after his first in 2003, and that's Red Bull Sugar Free, which, if you think about the journey of a company, how many companies in the world launch their second product after 16 years? Most founders we see these days want to constantly launch new products after the other. But Didi recognized that one product, one brand, and he constantly capitalized on that for 16 years. And the second product he launches is just an ancillary product, very similar to the brand, catering to a very slightly different market. People who want to drink Red Bull but don't want the sugar. So this shows the beauty of one product and one brand. And I do believe that brands are only built around one product because people are only able to associate one company with one product. It is very hard to capture market share or mind share of a consumer with multiple different products. So as we see, competition is unable to keep up with Red Bull. The market has gotten highly competitive in the US because Pepsi and Coke, as giants, are trying to compete in this ever-growing market. They recognize that this is the next phase of drinks, and they want to compete in this market, but no one is able to compete with Red Bull. Till date, they own the highest market share in the industry. And when people ask him why was Red Bull able to succeed, Didi says that nobody wants a Rolex made in China. And this speaks to the authenticity of the brand and the loyalty that the brand has been able to command over the years. So as discussed, the first decade of the 21st century was marked by aggressive expansion into football, hockey, music events, and athletes. As we roll into the second decade of the 21st century, the brand slightly starts tweaking into a media house. They recognize that sports as a media is great, but they also need to start launching TV shows, films, magazines. So they launched the Red Bull Media House, which is basically a way for them to compete with every other media outlet in the world by creating their own media. They started launching pamphlets in newspapers by giving out the Red Bull pamphlet and building this media empire. So the mind that from a cost perspective, what Didi thinks about these businesses is that Red Bull is this great media empire where he pours in money to the time the media empire becomes independently profitable. What I mean by this is that he acquired an F1 team which was running in losses for multiple years. He lost almost $200 million every year to run the sports team. But this branding brought in almost $300 million worth of marketing for Red Bull. However, after 5 to 7 years, the F1 teams were able to be profitable on their own. So they were churning out a profit while after many years, after much investment that no other company could take. So at one end, this is a marketing expense for Red Bull, but it is not a one-time marketing expense for Red Bull because they own the underlying media entity as well. So while the media entity is accruing value and growing in value, so is the Red Bull brand. And eventually, once the media entity starts churning out a profit, the cost of acquisition of a customer for Red Bull goes down significantly. And this turns into a very virtuous cycle for Red Bull that continues to succeed till date. So Red Bull is only growing. In 1995, they first acquired their first F1 team, but then they broke out and sold it off in 2003. In 2005, Red Bull acquires its full F1 team. The 1995 Red Bull acquisition was in partnership, but in 2005, they go out and buy a F1 team on their own without any partners. And now they own another F1 team as well. They own hockey teams, they own football teams, and they use these negative cost of acquisitions and incubate them for a long enough time period to turn them into a profit center and further growing the Red Bull brand. Today, Red Bull manufactures nothing. They have a bottler in Austria that bottles Red Bull. The flavor and the initial powder is produced in Thailand by Charlio's company. And Red Bull is a company that manufactures nothing, but it manufactures everything as cultural conversation. It is a media company that is marked by immense success. They own media enterprises and they're constantly innovating on that. In fact, in one of the most outlandish sponsorships that Red Bull undertook was sponsoring someone to dive from space, from the International Space Station to Earth. It took almost 7 years to plan this out, and I think it took almost $30 to $50 million in investment from Red Bull's side. And Red Bull had exclusive rights to display this, market this, and with their branding, they launched. They do all kinds of extreme sports today, right? Like if you go on their page, you will see all kinds of iconic branding, all kinds of absolutely absurd things that we can't even imagine, right? Like they sponsored an aeroplane to lie on a helipad on the Burj Al Arab hotel in Dubai. It's absolutely phenomenal on how they've been able to build a brand, but leveraging different tactics, recognizing media as a way to further build the brand and build loyalty. People swear by the brand. That's why they buy over 10 billion cans every year. I think it is a masterpiece in brand building. And Didi Mateskic is one of the most iconic entrepreneurs of our generation that have not been covered extensively.